Hello, art teachers. This is my demonstration of how I teach needlework to elementary students. I have a couple of other videos already that give you a lot more detail, more photographs, more context. So this is just going to be the hands-on demo so you can see some of the things I'm talking about more clearly. It's difficult for me to get real close up with my camera set up here, so for some things, I'm going to recommend you look on YouTube for some better videos that show it more clearly. But here's what I have to show you. Number one, we're going to use an embroidery hoop. So when I hand out the embroidery hoops, this is what I say. Your embroidery hoop comes in two parts, an inside and an outside. I want everybody to take it apart, put it together, take it apart, put it together. It has this little screw on the top. That'll make it tighter and looser. If it's too tight, it can be hard to get this open. You might have to loosen it up a little. The best way to take it apart is just put your thumbs in there and pull it apart. Now you can tighten and loosen the screw, but do not lose this screw. Don't take it all the way out because we need this screw. It won't work without it. Now the job of the embroidery hoop is to hold our cloth. I just use scraps of whatever sort of quilting weight cotton sheet material works. Any sort of hand-me-down fabric will do. Shirt fabric works fine. You want to cut it maybe an inch or more bigger than your hoops, but don't make it too big or it'll be too much to handle. But it definitely has to hang over the hoop a little bit. So the way the hoop works, you're going to put your ring down. You put your cloth over the top. And then you put the outer ring on top of it. And if it won't go on, you might have to open or close that screw a little. And then just let them spend some time opening, closing, put it in, take it out, help your neighbor. Some people are going to get this very easily. Some people it's going to take more time. Some people are not going to be able to get it down, and you just have to open that screw a little bit. These screws are tough for little hands. The cheapest hoops have the worst screws. You can get hoops that have much easier to use screws, but they're more expensive. So when everybody has their fabric in their hoop, they're going to beat it like a drum. You know, it's good if it's, oh, that's too loose. So I'm going to get a little bit tighter. And also if you just pull at the corners, that'll get it tight. You want it to be tight like a drum, and so if they want to drum on it, that's okay, as long as they're not taking it apart. Also, they're going to put it on their head like a hat. That is okay. I want them to get familiar with the materials. So the next thing we're going to talk about is needles, and my setup here is not great for close-up, but I think you can see I discussed this at length in some other videos, but these are tapestry needles. You can see they're nice and long. These are sharps. They have a point on them. These are blunt needles. They don't really, you can see there's a little bit of point, but mostly these are rounded and these are sharp. In the needlework I teach for elementary, there are projects that we need sharps and there are projects that we need blunts. This is definitely a sharps project, and if you want my whole talk about why we don't use plastic needles, that's in my other videos. I also have videos where I talk about what string we're going to use. This is pearl cotton. You are going to want them to be able to thread their own needle, and what I tell my kids is I can thread it for you, but you're going to have to wait in line. So this is definitely something, especially with these larger tapestry needles, they're going to be able to do. The length of the thread, it's hard for me to show you here because I'm so close up, but it's going to be about the length of their arm. If they get it too short, they're going to have to keep rethreading all the time, and if they get it too long, it's going to get knotted up all together. They have a real problem tying knots. I'm going to show up close. This is the knot that I teach them, as simple a knot that can be, but you know they can't even tie their shoes. So you may have to tie knots for them. I can tie knots really quickly because this is my thing, but the knot tying takes time, and that's just something that you have to tell them. All the explanation about tying the knot at the end, do not tie it on your needle, is in my other videos. I will stress that you want this to be able to slide. That's why one of the reasons we don't tie it to the needle. To keep it from falling off altogether, you want to teach them to pinch it right there. And a lot of this is hard to explain in the demonstration. You just have to get used to doing it. And if you're already a needle worker, it'll come much more quickly. So we're in our first year in second grade. I have them just do embroidery. That is, we are using a single piece of fabric in a hoop, and they're just going to stitch on top of it. They're not sewing two things together. You can do this with a pencil or a marker. I tried it with a pencil. It doesn't really show up on the screen, so I'm going to do it with a marker. My name starts with H, so I'm going to do an H. A letter is a good thing to start with. You could also have them do a circle, or a heart is something a lot of people like, but you definitely want to write it right on the fabric. You know, the marker's going to show, but that's okay for our purposes. So we're going to take the needle and thread. Again, it's hard to get it all in the same picture. We're going to start underneath, and we're going to pull it, and this is important. You got to pinch it right there, and you're going to pull it all the way through, all the way up. And then you're going to turn around, and you're going to take it all the way down. Come up for your next stitch. All the way up. And our next stitch is going to be all the way down. So here's what you got to look out for. One, you're going to get some kids who are stitching and they're going to pull that right off. And I let them do that a couple times. They will say, Mrs. Wineland, my thread keeps falling off. And I'll say, no, it doesn't keep falling off. You keep pulling it off. So I'll demonstrate up close to them. See how that's going to come right off when you pull that? Okay, let's put your fingers right there. Okay, now, see? It's not going to fall off. So you have to remember to pinch the eye every time. So that takes a little while. Some kids get it right away, but that takes a little while for some others. If you have a student that really has a problem with it, especially if you have children with poor motor skills, you could double knot. You could tie both ends together. The next problem you're going to have is wraparound. So they're, I'm on the bottom here, and they're going to come around and they're going to want to stitch on the top. Miss Weiland, is not working. That's okay. This is a mistake everybody makes. All you have to do is take your needle out, and then you can just pull that right out. Remember, when you're on the top, when you come out the top, you have to go in the top. And when you're on the bottom, you have to go back in the bottom. The other things you want to look out for are you're going to get some students very exact. Forgive me for my focus going in and out, trying to hold it still. And they're going to make stitches so tiny. These stitches aren't even as tiny as some of my student stitches. If you get a student who is hardly making any progress at all because they are making stitches that are so tiny, you can encourage them to make their stitches a little bit bigger, about 1/4 inch. And then, of course, your other problem is students who are either making gigantic stitches or making gigantic stitches and having absolutely no sense, having any sort of control about where they're stitching. It's okay. The main goal here is to get the stitches all the way through. You can encourage them to go more slowly, have more control about where they're stitching. I usually just let them go and stitch wild, because in this very first lesson, I am wanting them to just enjoy stitching and not be too hung up on doing it right or wrong, and just let them make the mistakes. Because if you do stitch, we all make those mistakes. And I don't want them to quit. I don't want them to think, oh, I did that wrong. I can't do this. I can't stitch. Yes, you can. At this point, I really only teach them the running stitch. Of course, there are hundreds of beautiful detailed stitches that are part of embroidery. But at this point, we're just going in and out, up and down. The other main problem that we have is kids who will want to stitch and stitch and stitch and not pull anything through. You know, they've seen people stitch really fast across the top like that, and then they say, and actually that is still pulling through, but they'll get stuck with all of this hanging out there. You know, and they say, oh, you know, Miss Wineland, this won't work. Let me do a few more. You know, this sort of stitching is not for beginners. So that, you know, they'll get it stuck and it won't pull through, and so you have to explain that you need to pull every single stitch all the way through, because unlike me, who actually did that very well, is usually not going to be able to pull all the way through. Thread is cheap, and it is absolutely nothing to pull those stitches out. You probably are not going to show them how to do it with the tip of the scissors, but you can do it with your needle. You cut things out if you need to cut them out. If you get a big wrapped up mess, just cut it out, start new. You know, we're using pretty inexpensive materials. Even the needles are inexpensive. So don't get hung up on doing everything perfectly or correctly any more than you would when they're using crayons or pencils for the first time. Let them figure out literally the ins and the outs and how that works. Let them get knotted up. Let them cut it out. This first lesson especially is just all about getting the fabric in, getting the all the way in, all the way out stitches. When they finish something in the middle, I usually, if they've got more time, I encourage them to go all the way around in a circle, change colors. You're going to have a huge variance in abilities at this point. Now class is over, and I have looked everywhere in my workroom here and cannot find a needle noodle, but you'll see in my videos that I have a little chunk of pool noodle that I have them put their needle in their noodle. In this case, I'm just going to have them put in a little piece of felt. Emphasize that you do not want to lose this needle. I always say, because kindergartners come in here and I don't want the kindergartners to get poked. The noodle system, the pool noodle system, works really well. So put your needle in your noodle. Another thing you have to watch out for is very often the minute they get this thing in the hoop, they're going to want to cut it around in a circle. No. The material is square or rectangular. It's going to stay rectangular. The purpose of the hoop is not cutting a circle. So be sure you catch that before they do it, and if they do it, discourage it, because you want to be able to move this hoop around, and you want to be able to take it off and put it back on again the next week. They're not keeping this hoop. This hoop is a tool that the next class has to use, and if you cut this in a circle, you're not going to be able to put it back in. But now that we're done with this, you can take this out of the hoop. You can undo this screw, but that's really hard. What I like to do is just put my thumbs here and pop it out. You're going to need to put this back in. Make sure you put both pieces together. It drives me crazy. They don't. They'll put it back in the hoop box just willy-nilly, and then I have to match them all up. If you're teaching needlework, you're going to spend a lot of time with the supplies matching things back up. You got to put these back in the hoop box. You can put the needles back in the needle box. If you're keeping this for next week, I usually put a piece of masking tape on it with their name on it. But generally speaking, at this point, I just let them go home. And then the next week, we do it all again, and we aim for something a little more finished. But even then, first assignment is very free form. Next, we're ready to move on to third grade. Third grade is going to use a lot of the same beginning steps, and if you are teaching this every year, your third grade graders will have already done some of this in the second grade. If not, that's a perfectly good place to start. Again, we're going to use this hoop. This is applique. Before we were just doing embroidery, we were just stitching on top of the fabric. But in applique, we are going to put two pieces of fabric together, one on top of the other. Cotton will work for this. Sheets, shirts, flannel makes a nice fabric to do this. For the top layer, I like to use felt, and forgive my garish orange here, but I wanted to use something that nobody else is going to want. You want to cut a simple shape out of felt. Felt is great because it doesn't fray. That is, the edges of the fabric don't come undone. You can use any simple shape, hearts, flowers, circles, whatever. I like to use letters because everybody loves the letters of their name, and I recommend using stencils for this. If you don't have like ready-made stencils, just make some cardboard stencils of maybe some different easy shapes. For this, we're going to have to use a pin. I usually pin for them because the way to use a pin is you put it in one side and then you bend it and it has to come out the other side. And they will want to pin things like that, which will not actually hold anything in. So teaching them to use a pin is good, but because I'm trying to concentrate on other things, I usually just do the pinning myself. And how many pins you need depends on how many sort of ends you have hanging off. So I have my shape pinned down to my fabric in the hoop, nice and tight, just like last year. Going with purple this time. Let's see. There are many videos on threading a needle and helps for threading a needle. I recommend going on YouTube and looking for helps for threading the needle. There are also tips for tying the knot. The one tip that I will say is you want to have your thread short. Don't try to thread a needle with your thread that long. You want to have your thread short, and also hold your thread still and put your needle on top of the thread. Don't hold your needle still and try to get the thread through it because that'll take all day. And if the ends of your thread get fuzzy, just clip them right off there. I can thread needles and tie knots in my sleep, but I recognize that that's not going to be everybody's skill. So, you know, it takes a little time for everybody. I think I showed you the knot before. Just sort of turn it like that. But I also want to show you how most needle workers do it. This is how I do it, and this is how I can tie so many of them so fast in class, is I wrap it around my finger and then I roll it off my finger and pull it down. And that makes a nice big knot. You know, I can do that really fast. Then with your applique, you're going to start with that same running stitch. All the same things apply about if you're on the top, you need to go back in on the top. If you're on the bottom, you need to go back in on the bottom. Sometimes holding that fabric still takes a little bit of a challenge. Sometimes they will have trouble because they're getting their thread caught on the pins. You can take out the pin as soon as you have stitches there to hold it down. Of course, you know, the challenge with them taking out the pin is where are they putting that pin. So you definitely need to have a good system for that. Now I'm going to try to adjust my camera, see if I can get a little closer for you. Focus and lighting are always my twin challenges. So we've already done the running stitch, and that's what I recommend when you're just doing embroidery. There's nothing else. And you can keep doing the running stitch here, but I want to introduce the whip stitch. The whip stitch goes around the edge of what you're adding. You're always going to come up one way and go down the other way. You will have these two options as well when we get into sewing with 5th grade, when we're doing 3D things. Very often the students will switch from the whip stitch around and around to the straight stitch, you know, the running stitch, and some of them are self-conscious about it and they want to fix it, and you can help them do that. But as I've said before, at this stage, I just want them to be successfully attaching two things together. If they can do that and they get the praise, they're going to feel like, I can do this. Now, I had been coming up through the felt and going out through the fabric, but you can just as easily come up on the outside and go down on the inside. Once they get the hang of this, it is very easy to layer multiple pieces of felt on here. You don't want to get them all at once, but you know, have them do one thing at a time. But there's nothing to keep them from adding as many layers as they want. If you really want to get fancy, you can add beads and buttons as well. And this is the end product, which is why you want them to keep it rectangular. I'm going to take these pins out, even though we're not finished. There's a couple of different things that you can do. Want to display these. One thing I've done is take a rectangle of foam core and just sort of wrap it around the foam core, and you can pin it on the sides or tape it on the back, put a string on it, and that's something that you can hang up, or you can just have them take it home as is. You can put the felt on top of fabric. Felt on top of felt also stitches really well. The only drawback is it's really difficult to put felt in a hoop. If their hand size and strength is big enough that they can hold the materials without getting them all bunched up together, then this works very nicely. And I realized that I did not show you how to finish off. You always want to finish on the back. Usually I do this when it's still in the hoop. And again, here's a couple things to look out for. One, the students will stitch all the way up till they have like, their needle is sticking out like that. And you're like, well, there's, they're like, can you tie this for me? I'm like, well, no, because you didn't leave anything. So you want to teach them to leave you at least this much so that you can tie it. I like to turn it over on the back. And tie a knot on the back like that if I can. If it's long enough, you can tie it in a knot like that. Again, that's sort of a more skilled needleworker thing. But the easiest thing, if they've left you enough string, there's nothing much you can do besides cut it off if they haven't left you enough string. It's called tacking. And tacking is where you sew back and forth in the same spot at least 3 times. This is the one I usually teach them because it's a challenge to teach the small hands how to do knots. If you sew 3 times in the exact same spot, that's going to make a nice knot that is not going to come undone. If they haven't left you enough and they come up to you like this and like, oh, this is, can you tie a knot for me? If it's double, sometimes you can cut it here and tie a little knot, or sometimes it's just too short and that's the best you can do. The important thing at this stage is to encourage them and not scare them off. Fiber art is different from other media, especially two-dimensional media, but it's not inherently more difficult. It's not more expensive. It's not special. So you don't have to treat it like a one-time opportunity or something that is so special it must be done perfectly. Like any other thing that we're given a try and experimenting with. My big mission as an art teacher is all of my students experience all sorts of different media, because I hate encountering adults who say, oh, I wish I could do that, but I can't draw, or I'm not an artist. And I think so much of it comes from some experience in school art that their teacher was discouraging of them, or told them they did it wrong, and then they think, oh, since I did it wrong that time, I can never do it again. They are definitely going to do this wrong, and I think it is best to let them know that. And sometimes when they accidentally make knots, or sometimes they will sew things together in a way that they get it all wrapped around the edge here, I'll tell them about the times that I have accidentally sewn my projects right to my pants because, I was working on my knee, and that any mistake that they can make is the same mistake that every other needleworker before them has made. And it's just so easy to fix. And on that note, I'm going to show you a couple more things. One, the seam ripper. The seam ripper is a specialty tool, comes in different sizes. In both cases, it has a little sharp end for picking, little ball end, and that space right down here, that's a cutter. But mostly what you use a seam ripper for is plucking out stitches. And it's great to have a seam ripper, but you don't necessarily need one. You can just as easily use a needle. And you can also just pull things out by hand. If it's short enough and you don't have a knot at the other end, you can just pull it out. Let's see. Pull it right out. Ripping stitches can be a lot easier than erasing drawings. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about, but I go more in depth in some of my other videos, is what type of thread to use. This is pearl cotton. And I know it's kind of hard to see because it's so small here, but this is all wrapped up together. It is a single string. This is embroidery floss. An embroidery floss is made to separate out into individual strands. So you can choose how many strands you stitch with at a time. You know, you can stitch with a single strand or all 6. Most people go 2 or 3. This is not difficult to do with your adult hands, but this is going to be a real mess for kids. So even though it's called embroidery floss, and you can see it's thicker too. You know, I think embroidery floss makes a nicer finish on the surface of a project. Go with the pearl cotton. And that's spelled pearl, P-E-A-R-L, and also P-E-R-L-E. So it's interchangeably spelled when you buy it. Because this is not going to separate, it's not going to fray, and it's not going to get all bunched up. The other thing is both embroidery floss and pearl cotton come in both of these shapes. This is a skein or a hank, and this is a ball. I can pull out 1 thread at a time of this skein with no problem. Your 7-year-old cannot. So if you don't want a big balled up mess, make sure that you get your thread in rolls or balls, not skeins, or you're going to have a big knotted mess. Look on YouTube for much better demonstrations of up-close stitching of the running stitch and the whip stitch. There's also some great tips on how to thread the needles, how to knot the threads that I show to my students that I think are more effective than the way I explain it. As for my videos, I have one that is a curriculum video that tells you what grade level I teach stitching, kindergarten all the way up through adult. Embroidery, the single stitch I do at 2nd grade, the adding the felt is 3rd grade, and then I go on to show you what I do on 4th and 5th and beyond. I also have another video that really talks in depth about the different kinds of needles, the different kinds of threads, the different types of fabric, and which needles go with which threads and which fabrics. Also look for more of these how to teach demonstration videos in which I include the information that I give to the students as we're working and also the things to look out for. I'm Heidi Howe. Now go out there and teach your kids to stitch.